everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and we're so excited to have legal aid and balancing the scales here today. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our speakers.
Thank you so much, Sophia, and thanks everybody for being here. We really appreciate it. So I'm Colleen Foley. I'm the director of the Legal Aid Society of Milwaukee, and with me is my special guest, Ben Califf. Ben is the VP for Strategy and Culture at Bader Philanthropies here in town. So you'll learn a little bit about Bader and the focus today of our podcast, which is Balancing the Scales, is the role of philanthropy through turbulent times and beyond. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with Ben. He's one of my favorite people to talk to, period. And before we begin, Sophia asked me to read a disclaimer, which I will happily do. The views expressed here today are those of the individual speaker and not of Marquette University. The use of Marquette's facilities do not constitute an endorsement of the views expressed. Marquette University does not endorse any candidate for public office, political party, or referendum matters, and no fundraising for these activities can take place at this event. So none of those things will happen, I assure you. All right. Our conversation today is going to start with just, again, an introduction of Ben Califf. And Ben, tell us about your origins. Where are you from? A little bit about your education.
Yeah, sure. You guys hear me okay? Yeah. So like Colleen said, I'm Ben Califf with Bader Philanthropies. I was born here in Milwaukee, grew up here, was raised here. Grew up in Fox Point. Went to the Milwaukee Jewish Day School, if any of you know it, a very small Jewish school on the North Shore. Went to Nicolet after that for a few years, and you know, a lot of what I think about and talk about relates to my story in terms of like, how do we help society? How do we help people be the most excellent versions of themselves? And so when I was in high school, I just felt like I did not belong. I was on the, like, what some people would call the gifted end of the bell curve. And, you know, I don't think we do nearly enough to support people on either side of this, right, to help people who have special needs, but also people who don't fit in on the other side of things. And so I dropped out of high school when I was 16 because I just didn't feel like the system really had my interests at heart. I love learning, I love reading, I love thinking, and school just wasn't doing it for me. So I left school at 16, kind of not knowing what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. I was a dumb teenager, and you know, had a lot of big dreams and big visions. None of them had anything to do with career or money or like fitting into society. So I went straight to UW-Milwaukee after leaving Nicolet, and just started learning. I just loved reading, loved learning, and I took a Psych 101 class and got really, really interested in the mind and consciousness, in the way that people think and show up in the world. And so I got a psychology and philosophy degree. I had that by the time I was 17. I just devoured textbooks and courses at UWM. And then I thought I wanted to be a clinical therapist, got into a master's program, and realized really quickly that I hated people. I was a dumb young teenager. I just very antisocial at the time, and a week into this program, I realized oh my God, to be a therapist, I have to talk to people all day. So that was not going to work for me. So I went back to the drawing board with the help of my parents and a great social support system. I decided to go into neuroscience because I really loved the philosophy of consciousness and thinking about the mind. And I thought I could find consciousness if I dug around in some brains. So I went back. I had to get a second bachelor's degree because I had skipped all the math and physics and chemistry that you need in order to do real science. And so after that, I came here to Marquette for their neuroscience program. And I did that for about 4 years. And halfway through that program, I had a series of events happen in my life that totally broke the way that I thought about the world. My grandma fell ill with this extremely rare and incurable disease called Creutzfeldt-Jakob's, which at the time I taught about this disease to med students here at Marquette in a class called Diseases of the Brain. And I just, after she passed, I just couldn't do the job anymore. I hated killing animals. I hated being so unemotional in my life. I just felt like there was a lack of empathy in the way that I showed up in the world. I was extremely rational, extremely scientific, and I just needed to go and do something else. So I went out into the world and learned how to talk to people. Started a life coaching business. I realized I knew a lot about how people work, and I completely changed who I was. Realized I could help other people change who they were too. So
thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I know you've mentioned to me before that you were a cab driver for a while, or
Yeah,
perhaps that was
a
means to an end.
Yeah, I mean, at this time, I didn't really know how to talk to people. So I became a Lyft driver so that people could sit in the back of my car and they didn't have to look me in the eyes when we spoke. They could just put their headphones in and, just ignore me. And I gave about 1,000 Lyft rides just to learn how to interact with people. And I came to really love it and explored Milwaukee in a way that I had never done growing up here. So got to meet a lot of amazing people doing that. And like I said, learn how to relate interpersonally.
And here we are having a conversation.
Yeah.
So that's a nice segue to Bader Philanthropies. How did you find a position with Bader Philanthropies, and tell us about your role there?
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about your role, and then we can step back and talk about Bader Philanthropies more broadly.
Absolutely, yeah. So after, like I said, giving about 1,000 Lyft rides and doing life coaching for about a year, I was a great life coach, terrible business person, but really made no money doing that at all. I discovered the nonprofit sector. I had never really thought about it before. I mean, my parents made me volunteer when I was young, if you can call that volunteering, right? But helping people at this individual level, life coaching, it wasn't very scalable. And I realized really quickly that the nonprofit sector was the solution to that problem in some ways, that there were all these people out here who were helping at a societal scale. And so I volunteered for an organization that was trying to open a school, which at the time was called Unity in Motion. It's now called Project Kindred. They do amazing work, look them up. And from there, their biggest funder was Bader Philanthropies. They offered me a part-time research position to put some of my skills to use, and I've been there for almost 10 years now. So that role evolved into what is now the Vice President of Strategy and Culture. So I run the Strategy and Culture team there, which is an amazing combination of very rational, logic-driven strategy and the more heart-based, emotional culture side of things, of helping people not just feel good when they show up to work, but interact with people and cultures that are completely different from them. And so, I mean, we can talk about sort of what Bader Philanthropies does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just a show of hands, how many people are familiar with Bader Philanthropies?
Excellent.
There we go.
Sort of.
A little bit of the crowd, just a little bit. So, who is Bader Philanthropies? How long have they been around? What's their focus?
That's a great question, yeah. Actually, I think 33 years now, 35 years. Well, it'll be 35 years next year in 2027, so they're just a little bit older than me. We're a private foundation, started and based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I think we're top 5 largest foundations in the state, maybe. Give away about $45 million a year to nonprofits all around the world. It's extremely fulfilling work, amazing stuff. One of the legacy families in Milwaukee called Bader started. We have 3 founders. I won't go too deep into the legacy of it because we try to stay humble in what we do and stick to our roots. But started by a guy named Alfred Bader, who founded what is now, I think, Millipore Sigma, so one of the largest chemical companies in the world. Made a lot of money doing that, and him and his first and second wives were all very, very philanthropic people and wanted to give their wealth back to the community that helped them create it. And so that's, grant making is one of our main things that we do, but we also do a lot of engagement in the neighborhood that we live in Harambe. Working with leadership now, and a lot of convening work too, bringing people together. We really believe that community and being together, speaking together, being with people who are different than you is really what makes communities better. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk for a minute about where Bader Philanthropy is relocated in 2018. And by the way, Legal Aid Society Milwaukee is we're a grantee of Bader. And Helen Daniels Bader, back in, I think, 1986, she did her master's in social work fieldwork at the Legal Aid Society. So she developed like a really close relationship with our organization, but also was a huge innovator about aging and Alzheimer's and what music brings to that community. And so we've been the fortunate beneficiary of a lot of generosity from Bader over the years. But when I started my role, does everyone know who the Legal Aid Society of Milwaukee is? Pretty much, I mean, just in a nutshell, we've been around. This is our 110th year. We provide free civil legal aid services to qualifying Milwaukee County residents on a host of issues. Sophia worked on our eviction team last summer as an intern from Marquette, and we have a number of Marquette law students who intern with us, and I think get a really meaningful, cool experience about interacting with clients directly and making a real impact on matters that involve housing security and consumer matters, and a team we call Health and Wealth, which is estate planning for low-income individuals. And we also have a very small immigration team and two guardian ad litem teams in family court and children's court. So that's the Legal Aid Society, which has had this close relationship with Bader for decades. But tell us about, the year I came in my role in 2018, Bader had relocated to MLK Drive up in the Harambee neighborhood. So tell us a little bit about that decision and why that mattered. You just spoke to it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I started at the foundation in 2017, so we hadn't yet moved our headquarters there. I got to witness the tail end of that process. But our CEO and president, Dan Bader, who is the son of Alfred and Helen, he has always been an extremely compassionate leader who really thinks deeply about how our work can help to change the places that we live. I mean, our mission is very simply just helping people and honoring the legacy of our founders. But the way that Dan thinks about that is all about how do we transform our communities. And so at the time when I started in 2017, we were located down in the 3rd Ward. And you've probably been to the 3rd Ward. It's, basically a tourist destination at this point. And when they opened the foundation there, it was not like that at all. It was old, abandoned manufacturing buildings. It was a very impoverished part of town. And over the course of being there, I think like 15 years or so, it completely transformed the neighborhood. And so, not to speak for Dan, but I think in his mind, he thought, well, how can we do this again? How can we go to an area that needs support and bring our resources, our assets, our attention, our energy, and help the people who live there to lift themselves up? And so, again, I don't know exactly how he picked that location. I think he's a very intuitive person, so probably just driving around the city, looking at different sites, talking to people. And he chose to move us to the Harambee neighborhood, which, again, even now, 5 or 6 years later, the neighborhood feels completely different than when we started. And we had a lot of conversations about gentrification, about poverty, about culture. How do you move to a neighborhood? It's a predominantly black neighborhood, but also it's a very diverse neighborhood in terms of the way Milwaukee works. We're a very segregated city, and Harambee lives right on the intersection of all of the communities. So, it's one of the more diverse neighborhoods in the city. And so we've done a lot of work there of engaging with residents, of bringing people into our building, of asking how we can support the community in a more direct way, and just be a good neighbor. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been a part of the, I think, at least monthly food convenings where neighborhood residents are invited in just to have lunch, and I think that's a beautiful thing, getting neighborhood residents really engaged with the organization and doing more than, and it's terrific to give away money. I looked at your stats on your website. $564 million in total grants since 1992, over 11,000 total grants to community partners, and as you said, at least 33 to 35 years in
It's
business.
35 years to 2027, yeah.
So, but not just giving money away, showing up in the community and listening to people and inviting them in to break bread is huge. So kudos to Bader.
Yeah.
You want to just talk for a minute about the Bader Leadership Institute, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation about philanthropy and why law students or lawyers should care about local philanthropy.
Sure, yeah. But I mean, very briefly, because I could talk about this forever, but because this is how we're connected in a more direct way. I'm grateful for the time we get to spend together.
Likewise.
But our newest initiative at the foundation is the Bader Leadership Institute, which I'm extremely critical in general about everything, and we'll get into some of that. But when I started at the foundation, one thing that I noticed is that we did a lot of basic needs funding, and that, I mean, we fund so many incredible programs that have helped like literally millions of people every single year. But one thing I noticed that was missing was a more systemic approach to solving problems in communities. I am a really big believer that helping people get fed, get clothes, get housing, those are systemic solutions in their own right. But there's this higher level of like community togetherness that we lack, especially in Milwaukee, but all around the world, that makes us incapable of solving our bigger, more complex, what we call wicked problems. And so we started the Bader Leadership Institute to bring together the most exemplary leaders in Milwaukee to try and figure out how we can solve these problems together. So thank you for being a part of it. I think you're an excellent example of like the caliber of people that we have together
Thank
here.
you.
Yeah.
High compliment. What I love about it too is that recognizing that the nonprofit organizations and leaders in the community weren't necessarily connecting to each other, that we can be in our own silos, and having us get to know each other and figuring out ways to better connect to best benefit the community, and recognizing that community leaders are beyond the typical corporate business partners, and that just being more thoughtful and casting a wider net.
And this will segue us into our next topic,
Exactly.
right? But that the silos run deep in all directions, ethnic, religious, sector. I mean, it isn't up to nonprofit leaders to solve these problems. They just happen to be people who show up every day thinking about it. But we need government and businesses and grassroots leaders to come together in order to get at these issues. You can't just rely on nonprofit leaders to do this, yeah.
100%. Which brings us to our primary talking point, which is, of course, we've all lived through maybe the most tumultuous year that anyone, not to be presumptuous, I mean, my dad was in World War II and lived through the Depression, but nonetheless, we're barely 3 months into the new year, and it's been a lot. I think the month of January was like 10 years long. So the reason this conversation came up in my mind was what happens. Federal funding has been really depleted, and so that changes the local ecosystem and how we all get to do our work. And what I will start with, which I referenced a few minutes ago, is why should a legal audience care about the role of philanthropy in terms of legal service delivery to low-income communities in particular?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this topic, you mentioned it already. The first thing that comes to mind is Helen Bader's history. That she was a really incredible person for a lot of reasons, but her humility is what always stands out to us at the foundation, and why we've adopted that as one of our values. Because when she went to social work school, she was in her 50s, so she had just gotten divorced. She was extremely wealthy. Like very rich. She did not need to work a day in her life, but she decided to go back to school so that she could help people in the community. She told no one about her wealth, and she did things like volunteer at Legal Aid Society, right? So we'll talk about like how I think about philanthropy in a bigger sense, but specifically when it comes to like legal aid and the relationship that the organization had with Helen Bader and now with Bader Philanthropies, she's a volunteer at this organization, bringing this very useful set of skills as a social worker, but also secretly donating large amounts of money to the organization behind the scenes as she's volunteering. And I cannot think of a better example of like the holistic nature of philanthropy, of donating your time and your talent and your treasure to, especially in the law, where it's like a knowledge economy, and it really is about what you know and who you know. And for people who are living in poverty, who don't have time, don't have money, don't have connections, like those services are invaluable. We really appreciate the work that Legal Aid does, and any public interest lawyer who's helping people who really can't afford it, right?
Right. And what happens in a year like this, where the ground's always moving? I know you have a grant cycle, and I'm sure that Bader, when I say you, Bader is inundated with even more requests for funding for lots of good causes. But if you could give the audience just a sense of how those decisions get made, particularly from your seat as the VP of Strategy and Culture for Bader.
Yeah, sure. I think that philanthropy, and especially private foundations, can be kind of a black box of money that we're all different, and especially family foundations. Like, you can imagine what it must be like to have a family with a very diverse set of interests. And our board is mostly family, so they are like, our board meetings are basically little family reunions. I don't know what your Thanksgivings are like, but you can imagine how difficult it is to make decisions together in those ways. So we work really hard to what we call provide equal access to resources, in the sense that we don't want philanthropy to be fully relationship-based. So the way that our founders operated, they would just become friends with people and write checks at the dinner table, right? Like, they'd have conversations like this, and they just whip out their checkbook and say, here's $1 million, thanks for doing the work you do. Which is fine. And
sounds awesome
for you, because Legal Aid was friends with Helen.
Sure.
But for organizations that are new, that are grassroots, that maybe come from minority communities that don't have those networks, this is not a great way to make equitable distributions of resources. So we try to keep our application process as open and accessible as possible. And yeah, that means a lot of requests. As some people at the foundation would say, you have to struggle to not be suspicious of everybody in this line of work, because when you're walking around and your job is to give money away, everybody seems to have an agenda, right? So balancing all of those tensions around, like, how do we listen as much as possible, take in as many applications as possible, talk to as many of those applicants as possible, while also being strategic in the way that we deploy our dollars, it's quite a balancing act. It's a lot harder to give money away than you probably think it is.
And being a part of that Bader Leadership Institute has helped me better understand about how complex it is. I think for the audience and the folks in this room as law students, why should you care, given you're starting your career in the law, and if you are interested in public interest law, it really matters, top to bottom about funding, and not that, in my role, it's a constant trying to figure out, you create these programs, you have a vision for a program. If you're fortunate, you get funding, and the irony of or the silver lining of the pandemic was a lot of funding became available that had never been seen before in those types of dollars. And so it allowed us to grow programs and have a vision about how can you help as many people and kind of show what you could do. At the same time, the challenge with anything like this is those funds subside, and the community comes to rely upon certain services, and how do you sustain them? And as a staff attorney for an organization like the Legal Aid Society or any of our peers, I think it's really important to remember, besides that you're doing incredible work that's very personally and professionally fulfilling and gets you in a courtroom and gets you in front of clients like few opportunities provide early in your career, but to remember that you're an ambassador for the work. We have a 15-member board. from most of the big law firms in town and Marquette Law School and the big corporations, Johnson Controls and Northwestern Mutual, and Rockwell. But our board certainly knows what we do, but I'm always taken somewhat by surprise at how many lawyers in the community don't necessarily know what we do. So I would just encourage people to keep that in mind if you are interested in public interest law. Another cool aspect of the work is, or something important to remember, is that you're essentially an ambassador for what we do in the community we serve, and the more lawyers in particular learn about the work, I think it's really motivating to volunteer. As Ben mentioned, just an important part of philanthropy is not just writing a check, and that's likewise for the legal community, to really understand why our work makes a difference, and that inequitable systems that are lopsided, correcting those, how that better serves everyone, and having a lawyer in the courtroom. You ask any judge and they will say in a heartbeat their jobs are a lot easier if each side has a lawyer, and they have to be really careful not to act as an advocate and make sure the system's working like it should be. So in terms of this topic, I just want to emphasize to law students and young lawyers that the work's amazing, but it's also an opportunity to educate the legal community better about why the work matters.
I mean, and especially because in any community, but especially in Milwaukee, like some of our biggest philanthropists are lawyers. And there's a lot of money wrapped up in the legal field and a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge. So yeah, I mean, law students, lawyers, all have an extremely important role to play in our philanthropic ecosystem, especially through volunteering. Every nonprofit needs a good volunteer lawyer, whether you're actually on their board or just somebody who can provide some expertise. Most nonprofit leaders know nothing about the law. So even a little bit of knowledge of wisdom can help a nonprofit go a long way when it comes to the very perilous legal side of the field.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we co-counsel too with lawyers at bigger firms in town to both educate our team to expand their knowledge base, but also it's also incredibly rewarding as an observer of folks who come in and co-counsel with us. It's a really rewarding experience for those lawyers as well. Let's talk for a few minutes about larger, philanthropy. Do you have, and we can talk, and I have some questions here. I don't know how much people know about kind of how philanthropy is. Obviously, there's lots of different models. There's incredible wealth in this country, and there's been different approaches to it. Like there's Mackenzie Scott, who's Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, who has given away a phenomenal amount of money in the last 5 years and has a team that, selects organizations in the community. Legal Aid was a beneficiary of that generosity when she gave United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County $25 million in 2021, of which $1.5 million came to the Legal Aid Society for our eviction-free MKE project. So that's one model where you trust the organization. You don't take solicited requests. Her team selects who's going to get those donations, and they're significant. And she has pet projects clearly, and then it's pretty no strings attached. They provide a ton of discretion and trust that the organization will handle the funding appropriately. And then we've talked in our Bader Leadership Institute about, then there's the Andrew Carnegie version, which is I'm not going to trust individuals or organizations with the money. I'm going to do some massive donations, and created the public library system. And I think he called it the Palace of the People, where you walk in, everyone's equal. You don't have to have a membership rate. You can become educated. So clearly, those are just two finite examples of really different philanthropy models. So just curious for you about pros and cons of each, for starters.
Yeah, my team at the foundation always makes fun of me because I'm a huge advocate for unrestricted funding, and this is I think more of the Mackenzie Scott style of things, where it really is a lot of trust-based philanthropy, but it's also really hard to get outcomes that you want in that way, right? So the Andrew Carnegie model, like, he was extremely specific in what he wanted, and yeah, I mean, who's really going to argue with the public library system and the good that it has done? But those came with huge strings attached for local governments in terms of what they had to do to upkeep them and staff them, and fundraise for them. And so, my philosophy, like writ large, is very practical through the lens of the foundation. It's one of my favorite things about working there is that we do a lot of, they let me bring my philosophical background to the table, but when it comes down to it, it's about how are we helping people? And so the very practical answer to that question is, in some ways it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're giving back, right? Is that you're not hoarding wealth, you're not sitting on your hands, you're not holding back knowledge from the community, that you are providing the great benefits that you've gotten from your community back to them. Whether you do that with strings attached or you do it with unrestricted funding, in the end, it might not matter to some degree. What matters is that the cycle of generosity pushes itself forward. Yeah.
And how does government play into that? And that's a huge question, but what's the role of government in terms of philanthropy or ensuring that certain societal ills get addressed, like huge ones, obviously, poverty and food shortages and all those types of issues?
Yeah, this is the question, especially for us in the United States right now. Like, philanthropy has a really important role to play, but we are not the solution to these problems. We give away a lot of money. We're a very, very philanthropic country. Milwaukee is a very philanthropic city, but those dollars pale in comparison to the scale of government budgets. And as you mentioned, with federal funding cuts, we can't fill those gaps. We just can't. And organizations will die because the government pulls that money back. We, like I said, give away about $40 to $50 million a year, and that is tiny compared to the scale of government grants. So I think one thing that's kind of cool about like the Carnegie model is that he gave a ton of money to start the public library system, but he leveraged public dollars to do it. He said, cities can only get this money if they pledge some of their taxpayer base to like upkeep these libraries and hire people. And I think it's not our goal when we're giving money away, but we are always thinking about how can we leverage generosity from other places, from other people. And if that means a public-private partnership, then the government has a big role to play in helping get at the root causes of some of these issues.
And so recently, everyone heard about lots of things happening in Minnesota in January, but what happened with the Somali community with fraud, with welfare fraud, just sort of triggered a lot of very negative ramifications in so many ways. Do you have thoughts about when something like that runs amok, both as to how do you police it better, or is that inevitable where there's going to be, and in the scheme of things, it was a limited number of people, but that was extrapolated further out and condoned a lot of other behaviors. But do you have thoughts just about, and you referenced that there are strings attached, Carnegie certainly did in terms of expectations of municipalities and supporting libraries, but any thoughts about, and even like drilling it down to what Bader expectations for grantees?
Yeah, like 80% of our giving is what we call like project or program specific. So that means that it has restrictions attached to it, that we are funding a specific program, and we look for specific outcomes attached to those dollars. We are not that tight about it compared to, say, other funders or government grants. Government grants are extremely specific, come with all sorts of strings, I'm sure you know, yeah.
Yes, they're painful.
Yeah, so we try to be easy. I mean, we want our grantees to do good work, and we know that one of the best ways to do that is to get out of their way. But we are a family foundation, which means that we have people on our board who care about the way that our money gets deployed, the specific outcomes that we're getting. So we do have strings attached. And at like a bigger philosophical level, what's amazing about this country and what has been written about and spoken a lot about in terms of our like philanthropic community here in the United States is that we are a pretty large country with immense diversity. And so the nonprofit sector fills this gap of allowing minority communities of all kinds, right? That's not just racial or ethnic. I mean, minority can mean anything here, right? Like, could be religious, it could be ideology, but allowing minority communities to have a stronger voice in the way that they operate in their own little zones, because there's just no way at the federal level to create policies or laws or funding that hits every single population. And so the example that you gave in Minnesota of this like daycare fraud, I mean, yeah, fraud happens all the time whenever money is involved, right? But it's an example of the scale difference between how high up the federal government is versus these very hyper-local community organizations, that no matter how rigid you make the restrictions on your grants or your giving, there's not a lot you can do if people run away with the money, especially when the distance gets larger. And so I'm a big advocate of the embedded philanthropy model that we use at the foundation, which is the closer you are to your giving, whether that's geographically or in terms of passion, the closer you are, oftentimes the better those outcomes become, because it's a lot easier to get the outcomes you're looking for when you know more about the people you're giving to, when you know more about the communities that you're involved in. And so I'm not sure that, I don't really have an answer to the fraud aspect of it, right? But I do think that what made this country great was the independence of our nonprofit sector, that it allows people to organize themselves by what they're passionate about and interact with people that they would never have interacted with if not for, say, the nonprofit they're volunteering for or the association that they find themselves a part of.
Yeah, no, and I thought you really did actually answer the question, which
Okay,
is you
yeah.
can't walk away from it. You have to have some checks and balances within reason, and the closer you are to the community, the better that serves everyone, and just ensuring like that it's responsibly used for the benefit of the largest number of people, which is what it's intended for.
Yeah.
Do you have any, maybe this is a oxymoron, but corporate philanthropy? Do you have any thoughts given the size of corporations in this country and the immense wealth, and certainly some corporations do some grant giving, but just to wrap up this portion of our chat.
Yeah. I mean, you read your little disclaimer, and I'm not allowed in my role to talk about policy or legislation. So I'll keep my thoughts on the like tax law out of the conversation. But I will say my team and the foundation are working to, especially through the Bader Leadership Institute, to get more connected to corporate philanthropy, because it is a huge and important part of the ecosystem. And whether we like it or not, this is, at least for now, a capitalist society, and large corporations do drive a lot of the priorities in communities. So I think it's a hugely important piece of it. I think there's an unfortunate aspect to philanthropy in terms of the PR that it generates, that people like you who are doing the work on the ground get a lot less attention than people like me who are giving the money away, right? And doing, like I said, giving the money away is not easy, but it is easier than doing the work. And we couldn't give that money away without you guys doing that work. So I think there's an unfortunate PR imbalance there that corporations often take advantage of, but sometimes that's what you got to do to get people to be generous, is give the attention, put the name on the building, let them use it as an advertising opportunity, because that money can do more good than just sitting in a bank account somewhere.
Right, couldn't agree more. Just to wrap us up here, I'm curious, what's on your radar in terms of future philanthropy? You and I had a chat before today about generational differences in giving.
Yeah, yeah.
What's your experience there? I can chat about mine after you talk as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can't say I'm all that connected to younger generations, but I will say that, like, I'm a millennial, and generations of people my age and younger have a very different approach to giving, a very different approach to societal transformation. I think there's a lot more passion for really changing things, and not just there's this old model of philanthropy of like giving back to be a part of your community, which I think is really important. But the way that I grew up and think about it, and I think people younger than me too think about it, is giving to transform a community. And that is a much bigger lift. It's harder. It has a lot more resistance associated with it. And I mean, top of mind for me is how can we innovate in philanthropy? It's been around for a really, really long time, and people don't tend to take risks with it because we just like to feel good and give the money away and call it a day. So, I mean, the Bader Leadership Institute is an example of this. Another project that we're about to kick off is like a cultural identity project from Milwaukee of how can we as a philanthropic organization drive conversation around who we are as a community. Because I'm a really firm believer that in order to solve any problems, in order to become who you want to become, you have to figure out who you are first. And Milwaukee as a city, as a region, has not done this work. And we have very complex, wicked problems like education, like segregation, like poverty that aren't going to go away until we can answer that question for ourselves. Who are we as a community?
Yeah, I agree with you there. And, perhaps branding Milwaukee as a social justice leader or with a local philanthropic system that cares deeply about making the city more equitable and dealing with housing security and dealing with all of the wicked problems, immigration and a working wage and all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, Milwaukee is an extremely diverse place. We're also very segregated, and I think there's a lot of negative in that, but there's also a lot of positive in that we have these very strong homogenous communities. And we have like the third largest Hmong community in the country. We have a very strong Hispanic community, a very strong Black community. Like, how can these communities not just take care of themselves and lift themselves up, but also interact with each other in a way that isn't like forced integration, right? That is bringing all our best strengths to the table. And I think that in essence is philanthropy, is being in community together. Like, how can we escape this like rat race of just for-profit, making money, like, it's every man for himself ideology, and like figure out how to be a community together again. I think that is philanthropy at its heart. Yeah.
I would just add to that too. Milwaukee's getting a lot of buzz. There was a recent Wall Street Journal article about it's one of the best cities in the country to come as a young professional and to have a quality, great quality of life. I don't know if it was Condé Nast or maybe Bon Appetit did one about the foodie scene here.
Oh, yeah.
How many terrific restaurants there are. So if the community, if the city doesn't decide who it is and who it wants to be and tackle these really challenging issues, they don't, if you don't manage them, they manage you. And philanthropy is a big part of that, and ensuring that this community works better for all its residents. And I just want to thank you so much, Ben, for being here and for this conversation. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add that I haven't covered. If not, we'll kick it out for any Q&A.
Yeah, you don't want to let me take the conversation.
No, I
anyway.
do.
We'll go
Don't
on,
be
on
shy.
tangent for hours. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you inviting me on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you to Ben for one thing. And I welcome any questions, anybody, or comments, or if not to put anyone on the spot. Okay, Sophia.
Hi. You mentioned that since you started working in the Harambe community, that in some ways it's unrecognizable. Could you speak to some of the specific changes that you've noted?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on MLK
Do you want to
Drive.
repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. So the question was, since moving to the Harambe community, it's changed a lot. I think you used the word, I don't know if I said unrecognizable, but it has changed a lot. And so, like, speaking to some of the specifics of what I mean there, so we're located on MLK Drive. Come visit us anytime if you're in the neighborhood. And when we moved there, there was a lot of fear in the neighborhood. Actually, the week that we moved into the office, there was a homicide 3 doors down, right? And so you can imagine what kind of environment that is for people, for kids. And just the level of like community safety that has changed since then. I mean, people in Harambe are very connected to each other, right? They've lived there for a long time usually, and they know their neighbors, but helping to overcome some of that fear and like be out and about and like just having people on the street, right? Having businesses on the street really helps to reduce some of that crime, to help people feel like they can be a part of their community. Like one very tangible example that I know our engagement team is super proud of is the Juneteenth parade. If you guys have never participated in it, it's an amazing experience. It's on June 19th, if you couldn't guess. And it has for a long time been, I think it was the first Juneteenth Day celebration in the country. But with ever since moving there, it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger every year. I'm going to get the number wrong. I think 75,000 people participated last year. So it's huge. And that is like way up from where it was before. And they now have a partnership with Summerfest. So, you know, like our role as a foundation, aside from giving money away, is really about networking, right? We have access to everybody because everybody wants money, right? So, and we fund like 600 organizations a year. So pretty much any nonprofit in the community is going to have a connection to us. And it gives us this high level view of, oh, who should be talking to who, right? The people who organize Juneteenth should be talking to Summerfest. And just making those connections really changes the character of the neighborhood. And now we're not the only foundation in the Harambe neighborhood. The Greater Milwaukee Foundation opened a building just down the street from us. And again, you go into this building which had been sitting vacant for decades, and it is it's the place to be for leaders in the nonprofit community. You walk in there and you see like the who's who of the nonprofit community. And when we started there, you know, almost 10 years ago now, it was an old, dilapidated building. Yeah.
Before we take another question, I want to recognize and thank Patrick White, who's here today, making all the things happen, and he's with iDesign Media. He's phenomenal, and he does wedding videos, just saying, if anyone's getting married in the near future. He's a total pro, so thank you, Patrick, as well. Is, any other comments or questions or concerns? You know, just don't be shy. All right. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to sit here and have this conversation with Ben, and I hope you found it interesting and informative. So thanks for being here.